This video will introduce you to the matrix query. The matrix query is a type of cross-tabulation that enables you to cross-tabulate your data. It is distinct from the cross-tab query in that it will let you cross-tabulate mostly anything versus anything else within your project, whereas the cross-tab query enables you to focus on the cross-tabulation of nodes versus case or file attributes. To create your own matrix coding query, head to the Explore ribbon and underneath the query area, choose Matrix Coding. In Detailed View, the query options will open. You'll see it gives us the option to specify the rows and columns of our matrix coding query. I'm going to make a very basic query just to show you how this works, and then we'll look at some more complicated uses of this particular query after we've covered the basics. You'll see there's a couple of ways that you can add items to your matrix coding query. The first option is through dragging and dropping, so I'm going to demonstrate this for my rows. I'm going to go to the Nodes folder and choose a number of themes. In this case, I'm going to look at community change, infrastructure, and real estate development, and I'm going to drag these over into the row. So that I have something to cross-tabulate these nodes against, I need to also specify what I want to appear in my columns. I'm going to click on the plus and choose selected items, and here you'll see there's a wide range of different things that we can bring in. As I'm demonstrating this query, I'm going to bring in a number of different things so you can get a feel for how this works. To start off with, I'm going to bring in a number of files. So I'm going to the interviews folder and I'm going to bring in an example of a video interview and a couple of textual interviews. I'm also going to go into the nodes folder and bring in some examples of cross-tabulating versus a theme. This time I'm going to choose the 4 sentiment themes. And then finally I'm going to go to cases and I'm going to choose a couple of places. Then I'm going to click OK and you'll see all of these items appear in the columns. I must stress that this particular query that I am demonstrating is not a good one. I've mixed up lots of different data types in my columns. However, this will be excellent to help me demonstrate how this query works. After specifying both my rows and my columns, I can click Run Query. Your matrix coding query results are displayed at the bottom of Detailed View as a table and as a chart. You can switch between the two by using the tabs here on the side. If we look at this table, you can see it's quite lengthy and therefore I have to scroll to see all of my values. This is because I have purposefully created more columns than I have rows. NVivo can help us with this by using transpose. If I click the transpose button, it will switch the rows into columns and the columns into rows, and now I can see all of my data on the screen at the same time. To help us explore our data in a little bit more detail, we can use cell shading. You can access this in the matrix ribbon. You'll see there are a number of different cell shading options. I'm just going to choose blue-white to demonstrate this. To read the table, it's very easy. I'm going to just have a look at the community change column to start off with. I can read the numbers down and it's showing me that the community change theme has 2 references in Barbara's interview. It has 0 in Betty and Paul's and 4 in Charles's. Remember, those are the files. Next up, I've also brought in some other themes, in this case the sentiment ones. So I can see the theme of community change overlaps with mixed sentiment 4 times, negative sentiment 12 times, neutral sentiment 0 times, and positive sentiment 6 times. Finally, I've brought in some other cases. I can see at no time does community change overlap with the Atlantic Beach case, but it does overlap once with Beaufort. It's important to understand what these numbers mean. By default, the matrix coding query displays the results as coding references. If you look in the ribbon under cell content, you'll see there is the option to change the values. Coding references is useful but can be misleading. So, a coding reference could refer to coding of one single word, a short phrase, an entire sentence, several sentences, a paragraph, several paragraphs, or an entire document. So this does not necessarily give a feel for theme prevalence depending on your data. If I switch to words coded, however, you'll see the results look quite different. This time I can see how many individual words occur where there are overlaps between the items in the columns and the items in the row. You'll also see the option for files coded and cases coded. These can be very useful as they will tell you how many individual files or cases these overlaps occur within. You can see there's also the option for coding presence. This is a simple yes or no option. It doesn't give you a feel for how often or how many or any feeling of numbers within. It just simply states whether those overlap or not. And then finally, there is duration coded. This will only work for files that are audio or video, and it will state in minutes and seconds how much time those two things overlap. So for example, if we look at real estate development, we can see 1 minute, 16.6 seconds is coded under the negative sentiment. We can also see in Betty and Paul's interview that 47.8 seconds of time has been allocated to the real estate development theme. Much like any query within NVivo, you can add this to your project so you can revisit and rerun this query later. You also have the option of saving your results within the search area of your project so you can revisit them at a later time. Now that I've created my demonstration query, I'm going to create another matrix coding query that's a little bit more useful. I'm heading to the Explore ribbon and choosing Matrix Coding to get a blank query. This time in my rows, I'm going to bring in the sub-themes under Economy and drag them across. And then I'm going to go into the Attitude themes and bring in these different forms of sentiment. At this point, we can see they're not necessarily in a beneficial order. So I can click on them and I can use these up and down arrows here to better place them. I'm going to make sure that it starts with negative before going to mixed, then to positive, and I'm going to keep neutral at the beginning out of the way. If I run this query, we'll get a similar view of results as we did before. I'm going to switch this over to words coded and I'm going to use the blue-white shading again. Here we can see, looking at these sub-themes of economy, the most prevalent overlap is between negative sentiment and fishing or aquaculture, with 1,916 words coded to both of these themes. This is really useful to help me see patterns in my data, and I can move over to the chart to look at a visual demonstration of this particular table's data. I can also use the type option in the chart ribbon to change how this is visualized. If we head back to this table, you'll also see I could export it and save it as an Excel file. This could be useful for manipulation in other programs or for other purposes. I want to show you one more thing with this query. I'm going to remove all of the different forms of sentiment / attitude that I have in the columns. And this time I'm going to click on the plus and select attribute values. You'll notice in here you can bring in any file or case classification attribute, and I'm going to go into case classifications and choose person, and then gender, and click OK. You'll see I can choose this as the value female. Next up, I'm going to repeat this process, going back in again, choosing case classification, person, and gender, but this time I'm going to choose male and click OK. And now run the query. This time I could once again switch to words coded and blue-white shading, but I can see if there are any gender differences in prevalence of these themes. In this case, I can see they're largely the same between both the female and the male participants. Before starting your own matrix coding query, it's useful to look at some of the ones already in the Environmental Change Down East project. If you head to the search folder and choose Node Matrices, this is the area where the saved results from a matrix coding query are stored. You can see two really useful examples. Here we have a matrix coding query on fishing decline by fishing involvement. So here we can see all of these different reasons that the researchers have coded to for fishing industry decline, but we can also see that these results are essentially cross-tabulated by whether or not participants are a recreational or a commercial fisher. In this case, I'd need to rearrange the table slightly just so that I can see the values underneath. Now that I've done this, we can see the first column are for the commercial fishers, the second column are for people who are not commercial fishers, the third column is for people who are recreational fishers, and the fourth column are for people who are not recreational fishers. This allows me to see if there's any difference between the groups. While there does seem to be a clear difference in this case, it's also important to remember that this could be due to the varied participant numbers. If, for example, we spoke to very few people who are commercial fishers, naturally this number will be low. Always look back at how many participants and their demographics that you have when interpreting this kind of data. Finally, if we look at the water quality attitudes by community, here is another really useful example. This time, it's exclusively looking at water quality issues referred to either positively, negatively, or mixed, but this time displayed by community. It's now time for you to run your own coding matrix query, but before you do, it might be useful to look at the video on cross-tabulations. The two queries are very similar, and so it's quite useful to see the differences between them before you start running your own.